Eleanor Whitmore had it all. A penthouse apartment, a multi-million-dollar company, and the kind of control that money could buy. But when her trusted driver of 3 years suddenly quit, claiming he felt uncomfortable, she had no idea that one phone call would shatter everything she thought she knew about herself. The replacement driver who showed up that night was nothing like what she expected. Young, confident, and dangerously attractive in a way that made her question every carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. What started as a simple business arrangement would soon become a collision of two worlds, forcing Eleanor to choose between the privileged life she'd inherited and the authentic love she'd never dared to dream of. But some choices come with a price that could destroy everything and everyone she thought she cared about. The real question wasn't whether she was brave enough to risk it all for love, but whether love was worth losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. If you're watching this incredible story unfold, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from, because this journey is just getting started and you won't want to miss what happens next. The elevator hummed its familiar tune as it carried Eleanor Whitmore to the lobby of her downtown building. She checked her phone for the third time in 2 minutes. Marcus should have been waiting by now. He was always waiting. The brass door slid open with a soft whisper. Eleanor stepped into the marble lobby, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She looked left, then right. No Marcus, no familiar black sedan, no apologetic wave from behind the wheel. A knot formed in her stomach. She dialed his number. "Eleanor," Marcus answered on the first ring. His voice sounded tired. "I was going to call you." "Where are you?" "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Silence stretched between them. Eleanor could hear traffic in the background, city sounds, not the quiet of her building's underground garage. "I can't do this anymore," Marcus said finally. Eleanor's grip tightened on her phone. "What do you mean?" "I quit. I'm sorry, but I quit." The words hit her like cold water. Marcus had been her driver for 3 years. He knew her schedule better than she did. He knew which routes to avoid during rush hour. He knew she liked the temperature at exactly 72 degrees. "Marcus, what's wrong? Did something happen?" Another pause, longer this time. I can't. I don't feel comfortable anymore. I'm sorry." The line went dead. Eleanor stared at her phone. The lobby suddenly felt too big, too empty. A security guard glanced her way, then looked back at his desk. She was Eleanor Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings. She didn't stand around looking lost, but right now that's exactly how she felt. Her phone buzzed. Daniel Price, her operations manager. "Eleanor, I got your message about Marcus. What happened?" "He quit. Just now, over the phone." "Jesus! Did he say why?" Eleanor walked toward the building's entrance. Through the glass doors, she could see the busy street, cars moving in both directions, people walking with purpose. Everyone had somewhere to go. He said he didn't feel comfortable. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Look, maybe this is a sign. You've been working too many late nights. Maybe you should cancel tonight's meeting." "No. Eleanor, no. The Peterson contract review can't wait. We've already pushed it back twice." "Then take a cab, or an Uber." Eleanor pressed her lips together. She didn't take cabs. She didn't use ride-sharing apps. She had a driver. That's how things worked in her world. Order, control, predictability. "Find someone," she said. "Call the agency. Call whoever you need to call. I need a driver tonight." "It's already 6 o'clock. Most services." "Find someone, Daniel." She ended the call and walked back to the elevator. Her reflection caught in the polished brass. Blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun. Navy suit, perfectly tailored. Everything in its place. Just the way she liked it. So why did she feel like everything was falling apart? Across town, Caleb Brooks sat in a corner booth at Mel's Diner, staring at his laptop screen. The coffee in his cup had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept taking sips anyway. Caffeine was caffeine. The job search wasn't going well. 3 interviews this week, 3 polite rejections. The warehouse gig yesterday had been particularly brutal. The manager took one look at him and suddenly remembered they'd already filled the position. Caleb knew that look. He'd been seeing it his whole life. His phone buzzed. Lena, his sister. "Any luck today?" she asked when he picked up, still looking. "Cal, you know you can stay here as long as you need. Marcus and I don't mind." Caleb smiled despite everything. Lena had been taking care of him since they were kids, even though he was 5 years older. Some things never changed. "I know, but I need to find something soon. Rent's due in 2 weeks. We'll figure it out. We always do." After they hung up, Caleb went back to his laptop. The job listings all started to look the same after a while. Customer service, retail, warehouse work. Nothing that paid enough to cover his expenses. He was about to close the laptop when a new posting caught his eye. Night driver needed, immediate start, professional appearance required, background check mandatory, competitive pay. Caleb read it twice. The pay was more than he'd made at his last 3 jobs combined. The company name was listed as Whitmore Holdings. He'd heard of them. Big corporate outfit downtown. The posting was only 20 minutes old. Before he could talk himself out of it, Caleb clicked apply and attached his resume. His driving record was clean. His background check would come back spotless. He was good with people, punctual, and desperate enough to take almost anything. His phone rang 15 minutes later. "Is this Caleb Brooks?" "Yes." "This is Daniel Price from Whitmore Holdings. I see you applied for our driver position." "That's right." "Can you start tonight?" Caleb blinked. "Tonight?" "I know it's short notice, but our regular driver had a family emergency. We need someone reliable. Your references check out, and your background is clean." It was a lie about the family emergency, but Caleb didn't know that. "What time?" 9 o'clock. I'll text you the address. You'll be driving Ms. Whitmore to a business meeting across town. Should take about 2 hours total." 2 hours. At the rate they were offering, it would cover his groceries for a week. "I'll be there." "Excellent. And Caleb, Ms. Whitmore values professionalism. Arrive 5 minutes early. Keep conversations brief unless she initiates them. She's had a long day." After Daniel hung up, Caleb sat back in the booth. He looked down at his clothes. Jeans and a button-down shirt. Not exactly professional, but it would have to do. He finished his cold coffee and headed home to change. Eleanor paced her penthouse apartment, checking her watch every 30 seconds. Daniel had called 20 minutes ago to say he'd found someone. A temporary solution, but better than nothing. She'd changed from her navy suit into something more comfortable for the evening meeting. Black slacks, a cream blouse, and her favorite blazer. Professional but approachable. The Peterson contract was worth $12 million. She needed to look the part. Her phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. "Driver will be downstairs in 5 minutes. Black sedan. Driver's name is Caleb Brooks." Eleanor grabbed her purse and briefcase. In the elevator, she tried to picture this new driver. Probably middle-aged like Marcus. Maybe a little gruff around the edges. Most professional drivers were. The elevator opened to the lobby. Through the glass doors, she could see a black car parked at the curb. The engine was running. Eleanor walked outside. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain. Fall was settling into the city, bringing shorter days and longer nights. She approached the sedan and reached for the back door handle. Through the driver's window, she caught a glimpse of the man behind the wheel. Young, maybe mid-30s, black. Eleanor's hand froze on the door handle. She hadn't expected this. The driver got out to open her door. Tall, well-built, wearing a clean white shirt and dark slacks. His movements were careful, respectful. He met her eyes briefly and nodded. "Ms. Whitmore? I'm Caleb," His voice was deep, steady, professional. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. She was staring, and she knew it. More than that, she was having thoughts she didn't want to examine too closely. "Thank you," she managed, sliding into the back seat. Caleb closed her door and returned to the driver's seat. He adjusted his mirrors, checked that she'd fastened her seatbelt, and pulled away from the curb with smooth precision. The car was immaculate. No personal items, no air fresheners. The radio was off. Everything exactly as it should be. So why did Eleanor feel so unsettled? "The Peterson Building on 5th Avenue, she said. "Do you know it?" "Yes, ma'am." His eyes met hers in the rearview mirror for just a moment. Then he focused back on the road. Eleanor opened her briefcase and tried to review her notes, but the words kept blurring together. She was aware of everything about the man in front of her. The way his shoulders filled out his shirt, the careful way he navigated through traffic, the fact that he hadn't tried to make small talk. She didn't usually notice her drivers. Marcus had been background noise for 3 years. Reliable, invisible, safe. This felt different. This felt dangerous. Eleanor closed her briefcase and stared out the window. Street lights were coming on, casting yellow pools of light on the pavement. The city was settling into evening, but her mind was racing. Why was she reacting this way? Caleb was just doing his job. He was polite, professional, and competent. There was nothing wrong with any of that, but there was something about him that made her feel exposed, like he could see right through her carefully constructed walls. "Take the long way," she said suddenly. "Ma'am, traffic will be heavy on 5th. Take Madison instead." It wasn't true. She just needed more time to collect herself. Of course. Caleb smoothly changed lanes, no questions asked, no commentary about traffic patterns or alternate routes. He simply did what she asked. For the next 20 minutes, they drove through the city in comfortable silence. Eleanor watched the world pass by outside her window, but her attention kept drifting to the man in front of her. She noticed things she shouldn't notice. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel, the profile of his face in the dim dashboard light, the fact that he wore no wedding ring. "Stop it," she told herself. "This is inappropriate." But she couldn't stop. There was something magnetic about his calm presence. He didn't try to impress her or win her approval. He just existed, steady and sure, focused on his job. When they finally reached the Peterson Building, Caleb pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. He got out to open her door, just as Marcus always had. "What time should I return?" he asked. Eleanor checked her watch. 2 hours, maybe 2.5. "I'll be here." Something in his tone made her believe him completely. "Thank you, Caleb." She walked into the building without looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her until the doors closed. Inside the lobby, Eleanor took a deep breath and tried to focus on the meeting ahead. Contracts, numbers, negotiations. Things that made sense. Things she could control. But part of her mind was already counting down the minutes until she would see him again. And that terrified her more than she cared to admit. The meeting with the Peterson group went smoothly. Eleanor presented her proposal with confidence, answered their questions with precision, and secured the contract without any major complications. It was exactly the kind of business victory she'd built her career on. But she couldn't stop thinking about the man waiting for her downstairs. When she finally emerged from the building 2 hours later, the black sedan was exactly where she'd left it. Caleb was standing beside the car, hands clasped behind his back, eyes alert. He spotted her immediately and moved to open her door. "How did it go?" he asked as she approached. The question surprised her. Marcus had never asked about her meetings. In 3 years, he'd treated her business like background noise. "Well," she said. "Very well." Caleb smiled, just a small curve of his lips, but it transformed his whole face. "That's good to hear." Eleanor settled into the back seat, and they began the drive home. The city looked different at night, softer somehow. The harsh edges of daytime commerce gave way to warm restaurant windows and couples walking hand in hand. "Have you been driving long?" Eleanor asked. It was a simple question, but it felt bold. She never made small talk with service providers. "A few years," Caleb said. "I like it. Gives me time to think." "What do you think about?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too personal. Too intimate. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Different things. Sometimes I think about places I'd like to visit. Sometimes I think about books I've read. Tonight I'm thinking about how different the city looks from inside this car." "Different how?" "Quieter. Like I'm watching it instead of living in it." Eleanor leaned back against the leather seat. She knew exactly what he meant. Sometimes she felt like she was watching her own life from a distance, making decisions and going through motions without really feeling connected to any of it. "Do you like that?" she asked. "Watching instead of living?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I think sometimes watching is safer," Caleb said finally, "but safer isn't always better." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. There was a sadness there, carefully hidden but not completely buried. They spent the rest of the drive in comfortable silence. When they reached Eleanor's building, Caleb got out to open her door as before. "Thank you," Eleanor said as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "This was good. I'm glad." She started toward the building, then turned back. "Will you be available tomorrow night?" "I have another late meeting." Caleb nodded. "I'll be here." Eleanor walked into her lobby without looking back, but she could feel his presence until the elevator doors closed. Upstairs in her penthouse, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Caleb was driving home. She wondered where he lived, what his life looked like when he wasn't wearing a pressed white shirt and opening doors for her. She wondered why she cared. Eleanor had built her life on control and predictability. Her apartment was decorated in neutral colors with clean lines and minimal clutter. Her schedule was planned weeks in advance. Her emotions were carefully managed and rarely displayed. But something about tonight had shaken that careful order. Something about the way Caleb had looked at her. Not with the deference she was used to from service providers, but with a quiet recognition. Like he saw her as a person rather than a position. It was unsettling, and strangely appealing. Eleanor finished her wine and got ready for bed. But as she lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow night's drive. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business. And that scared her more than any contract negotiation ever could. The next evening, Eleanor found herself changing clothes 3 times before going downstairs. She settled on charcoal slacks and a soft gray sweater, professional but not severe. She told herself it was because the evening meeting was with a longtime client, someone who preferred a relaxed atmosphere. She refused to admit it had anything to do with Caleb. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, she saw the familiar black sedan waiting outside. Her pulse quickened, which irritated her. She was 32 years old, not 16. She ran a multi-million-dollar company. She did not get nervous about her driver. But as she walked toward the car, she felt nervous anyway. Caleb stepped out to open her door, just as he had the night before. Tonight he wore a navy shirt that brought out the warmth in his dark eyes. His smile was brief, but genuine. "Good evening, Ms. Whitmore." "Good evening." She slid into the back seat. "The Hamilton Center on 3rd Street, please." "Of course." As they pulled away from the curb, Eleanor noticed that Caleb had adjusted the temperature without being asked. 72 degrees. Perfect. Marcus had taken months to learn that preference. "How was your day?" Caleb asked as they merged into traffic. Another surprise. Service providers didn't usually ask about her day. "Busy," Eleanor said. Then, because something about his presence made her want to be honest. She added, "Long. The Peterson contract from last night?" She looked up, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "You remember that?" "I remember most things." There was something in his tone that made her wonder what else he remembered. What else he noticed. They drove in comfortable quiet for a few blocks. Eleanor found herself relaxing despite her earlier nervousness. There was something soothing about Caleb's steady presence. He navigated the evening traffic with calm confidence. Never aggressive, but never hesitant either. "You're different from Marcus," she said suddenly. "Your previous driver?" "Yes, he was." Eleanor searched for the right words. "More formal. Is that better or worse?" The question caught her off guard. Marcus had never asked her opinion about anything. "Different," she said finally. "Just different." Caleb nodded but didn't push. Eleanor appreciated that. She wasn't used to people who knew when to let silence be enough. They were stopped at a red light when Eleanor's phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's name, and Eleanor's stomach clenched automatically. "Hello, Mother." "Eleanor, darling, I was just thinking about you." Margaret Whitmore's voice carried the particular blend of warmth and criticism that had shaped Eleanor's childhood. Love wrapped in expectations, affection laced with judgment. "How are you?" Eleanor asked. "Well, thank you. I had lunch with Patricia Reynolds today. She mentioned seeing you at the Peterson building last night. Said you looked tired." Eleanor closed her eyes. In her mother's world, looking tired was almost as bad as being unprofessional. "I was fine, Mother. I worry about you working so late. It's not healthy for a young woman to spend all her time in business meetings." The familiar weight settled on Eleanor's chest. This conversation was heading toward marriage, children, and all the ways Eleanor was failing to live up to her mother's vision of proper feminine success. "I need to go," Eleanor said. "I'm heading to another meeting." "Another meeting?" "Eleanor, it's nearly 8 o'clock. Business doesn't stop at 5, Mother." "Perhaps it should. At least for you." Eleanor ended the call without saying goodbye. She immediately felt guilty about being rude, then angry about feeling guilty. The cycle was as predictable as it was exhausting. "Family?" Caleb asked quietly. Eleanor looked up. His eyes were kind in the rearview mirror, not curious or judgmental. Just kind. "My mother," she said. "She thinks I work too much." "Do you?" Another direct question. Eleanor wasn't used to people asking what she thought instead of telling her what they thought. "Probably," she admitted. "But I like my work." "That's good. A lot of people don't. Do you like your work?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I like driving. I like the quiet. And I like meeting different people. What don't you like?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. Too personal again. But Caleb didn't seem bothered. "I don't like when people assume they know who I am before they meet me," he said simply. Something in his tone made Eleanor's chest tighten. She thought about her reaction the night before, the moment of surprise when she'd seen him through the car window. Had that shown on her face? Had he noticed? "That must be difficult," she said carefully. "Sometimes. But everyone makes assumptions. It's human nature." They'd reached the Hamilton Center. Caleb pulled up to the entrance and put the car in park, but he didn't immediately get out to open her door. "Ms. Whitmore?" His voice was gentle. "Whatever your mother said on that phone call, you look like it hurt." Eleanor stared at him. No one ever acknowledged her pain, especially not strangers. In her world, emotions were private things, carefully controlled and rarely discussed. "She means well," Eleanor said automatically. "I'm sure she does. But meaning well and being kind aren't always the same thing." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. And because hearing them from this man, this virtual stranger, felt like being seen in a way she'd never experienced before. "I should go," she whispered. Caleb nodded and got out to open her door. As Eleanor stepped onto the sidewalk, their eyes met for a brief moment. "Take your time tonight," he said. "I'll be here whenever you're ready." Eleanor walked into the building feeling shaken. The meeting with her longtime client, Robert Hamilton, was supposed to be routine. A quarterly review of their partnership agreement, nothing more. But she found herself distracted throughout the entire presentation. Her mind kept drifting to the man waiting in the car outside, to his quiet observations and gentle questions, to the way he'd noticed her pain and acknowledged it without trying to fix it. "Eleanor?" Robert's voice cut through her wandering thoughts. "Are you all right?" Eleanor blinked and refocused on the conference room table. Robert was looking at her with concern, his gray eyebrows drawn together. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?" "I was asking about the timeline for the Morrison project, but frankly, I'm more concerned about you. You seem distracted tonight." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. She prided herself on her focus, her ability to compartmentalize personal issues and stay professional. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." Robert leaned back in his chair. He'd been working with Eleanor for 5 years, long enough to know when she was deflecting. "Eleanor, we've known each other for a long time. You're one of the most focused people I've ever met. If you're distracted, something's bothering you." The kindness in his voice almost undid her. First Caleb, now Robert. When had people started being so perceptive about her feelings? "My mother called during the drive over," Eleanor said finally. "She has strong opinions about my work schedule." Robert chuckled. "Mothers usually do. Mine still thinks I should have been a doctor instead of a lawyer." "Does it ever stop bothering you?" "The mother thing? Not really, but it gets easier to hear it without taking it personally." Eleanor nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood the difference. They finished their business quickly after that. Eleanor's focus had returned, but she felt emotionally drained in a way that had nothing to do with contract negotiations. When she emerged from the building 90 minutes later, Caleb was leaning against the car, looking up at the evening sky. He straightened when he saw her and moved to open her door. "How was your meeting?" he asked. "Good. Fine." Eleanor settled into the back seat. "Thank you for waiting." "Of course." As they began the drive home, Eleanor found herself studying Caleb's profile in the dim dashboard light. There was something peaceful about his presence, something that made her want to say things she'd never said out loud. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "And do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Caleb glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" Eleanor struggled to put the feeling into words. "Like you're doing all the right things, making all the right choices, but somehow none of it feels like you." They were stopped at a traffic light. Caleb turned slightly in his seat to look at her directly. "Every day," he said quietly. The honesty in his voice made Eleanor's breath catch. She'd expected a polite deflection or a gentle platitude. She hadn't expected him to understand exactly what she meant. "How do you deal with it?" "I'm still figuring that out," Caleb said. "But I think it starts with being honest about what you actually want instead of what you think you should want." The light turned green, and Caleb faced forward again. But his words hung in the air between them. What did Eleanor actually want? The question followed her through the rest of the drive. She'd spent so many years focused on what she should want: success, respect, financial security, that she'd stopped paying attention to what made her happy. When they reached her building, Eleanor found herself reluctant to get out of the car. The evening felt unfinished somehow. "Caleb," she said as he opened her door, Would you like to come up for coffee? The words surprised them both. Eleanor never invited service providers to her apartment. It was unprofessional, inappropriate. But something about tonight felt different. Something about him felt different. Caleb hesitated. I don't think that would be appropriate, Ms. Whitmore. The gentle rejection stung more than it should have. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Of course, she said quickly. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Caleb said. I appreciate the offer. I just think it's better if we keep things professional. Eleanor nodded and walked toward the building without looking back. But as the elevator carried her to the penthouse, she found herself wishing she'd been brave enough to ask why keeping things professional mattered so much to him. Was it because of company policy? Or was it because of her? Upstairs in her apartment, Eleanor poured herself a glass of wine and stood at her windows again. The city sparkled below, full of lights and life and possibilities she'd never explored. She thought about Caleb's words, being honest about what you actually want. What did she want? She wanted to feel connected to someone. She wanted conversations that went deeper than business strategies and quarterly reports. She wanted to matter to someone in a way that had nothing to do with her bank account or her company's success. And she was beginning to suspect she wanted all of those things with the man who gently refused her invitation tonight. Eleanor finished her wine and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay in the dark thinking about tomorrow night's drive, wondering if Caleb would still be kind and gentle, or if her inappropriate invitation had changed something between them. She hoped it hadn't, because for the first time in years, Eleanor was beginning to feel like herself, instead of the person everyone expected her to be. And she wasn't ready to give that up. The next morning brought a crisis at work that kept Eleanor busy until well past lunch. One of their major clients was threatening to pull their account over a billing dispute, and it took 3 conference calls and 2 revised contracts to smooth things over. By the time she finally had a moment to breathe, Eleanor realized she'd been looking forward to the evening drive all day. The thought of seeing Caleb again, of continuing their careful conversations, had become a bright spot in an otherwise stressful day. But when 6 o'clock came and went with no word from Daniel about the driver arrangements, Eleanor started to worry. She called Daniel's office. Eleanor? I was just about to call you, Daniel said. We have a problem with tonight's driver situation. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Caleb called this afternoon. He said he won't be available for tonight's assignment. The disappointment hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She sank into her office chair, trying to process the information. Did he say why? Just that he had a personal commitment. I've arranged for another driver from the agency. He should be downstairs in 10 minutes. Eleanor hung up the phone, feeling hollow. She told herself it didn't matter. Caleb was just a temporary solution anyway. One driver was as good as another. But as she rode down in the elevator, she knew she was lying to herself. It did matter. He mattered. Somewhere in the space of 2 evening drives, Caleb Brooks had become important to her in a way she didn't understand and couldn't control. The replacement driver was professional and competent. He opened her door, kept the temperature exactly right, and delivered her to her meeting without incident. He was everything she'd asked for, and he was completely wrong. Eleanor spent the weekend in a state she couldn't quite name. Restless, maybe, or disappointed. She cleaned her already spotless apartment, reorganized her closet, and caught up on industry reports that had been sitting on her desk for weeks. None of it helped. Monday evening came with another late meeting, and Eleanor found herself hoping Daniel had managed to reach Caleb again. But when she stepped outside her building, a different car was waiting. A different driver stood beside it. Older, gray-haired, formal. Ms. Whitmore, I'm James. Eleanor nodded and slipped into the back seat. The car was clean and comfortable, the temperature perfect. James was polite and punctual, and Eleanor felt like crying. She realized with startling clarity that she'd been looking forward to seeing Caleb again, to continuing their careful conversations. their moments of unexpected honesty. In just 2 drives, he'd become the best part of her evenings. Now he was gone, and she didn't even know why. "Will you be needing a driver tomorrow evening as well?" James asked as they pulled up to her destination. "I'll let you know," Eleanor said. But she already knew the answer. She couldn't keep using drivers as an excuse to avoid dealing with her feelings. It was unprofessional and unfair to everyone involved. The meeting that night was routine, a presentation to potential new investors. Eleanor delivered her pitch flawlessly, answered questions with confidence, and secured commitments for nearly $8 million in funding. It should have been a triumph. Instead, she felt empty. On the drive home, James tried to make conversation. He asked about her business, complimented the city's nighttime skyline, and mentioned that he'd been driving executives for over 20 years. Eleanor responded politely, but found herself wishing for silence, for the comfortable quiet she'd shared with Caleb, when words weren't necessary and conversation came naturally. "James," she said as they neared her building, "thank you for tonight, but I won't be needing driving services anymore." "Of course, ma'am. Should I let the agency know you're canceling permanently?" Eleanor hesitated. Permanently seemed like such a final word. "For now," she said. "Just for now." The next few evenings, Eleanor took cabs to her meetings. The drivers were strangers who didn't ask about her day or notice when her mother called. They got her where she needed to go safely and efficiently. It was exactly what she'd always thought she wanted from a driver. So why did it feel so wrong? By Thursday, Eleanor had convinced herself she needed to move on. Caleb had been a temporary solution to a temporary problem. Whatever connection she'd felt was probably one-sided anyway. Professional drivers were trained to be personable and engaging. It was part of the service. But that afternoon, as she was leaving her office building to grab lunch, she saw him. Caleb was standing across the street, leaning against a different car, a silver sedan instead of the black one he'd driven for her. He was talking to someone on his phone, his expression serious. Eleanor's heart started racing. She told herself to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen him. But her feet carried her toward the crosswalk. When the light changed, she crossed the street without really deciding to. Caleb spotted her halfway across and straightened in surprise. He said something into his phone and hung up. "Ms. Whitmore." His voice was careful, neutral. "Hello." "Caleb." Eleanor stopped a few feet away from him, suddenly unsure what to say. I was just getting lunch." "How have you been?" "Fine. Busy." She gestured toward the silver car. "New job?" "Yes, another corporate client." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. He seemed tired, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Are you all right?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb's expression softened slightly. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. People moved around them on the busy sidewalk, everyone with somewhere to go, something important to do. "Caleb," Eleanor said finally, "why did you cancel last Friday?" He looked away, focusing on something over her shoulder. "I thought it was best." "Best for who?" "For both of us." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask what he meant, but a part of her was afraid she already knew. "I should go," Caleb said. "My client will be down soon." Eleanor nodded, but she didn't move. Neither did he. "I missed our conversations," she said quietly. Caleb's eyes met hers for a brief moment. "I did too." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing on the sidewalk feeling more alone than she had in years. That evening, Eleanor called her assistant and canceled her late meeting. Instead, she went home, ordered Chinese takeout, and sat by her windows watching the city come alive with evening lights. She thought about what Caleb had said, that it was best for both of us. What had he meant by that? Had he felt the same pull she'd felt? The same dangerous attraction? Or was she reading too much into professional kindness? Eleanor picked up her phone 3 times to call Daniel and ask for Caleb's contact information. Each time she put it back down. Whatever his reasons for pulling away, she needed to respect them, but respect and acceptance were 2 different things. The next morning, Eleanor was reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ms. Whitmore, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's about your driver." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "My driver? A woman named Lena Brooks. She says it's personal." Eleanor's heart started racing. Brooks. Caleb's last name was Brooks. "Send her in." A few minutes later, a young black woman entered Eleanor's office. She was petite but carried herself with confidence, and her eyes were sharp with intelligence. Eleanor could see the family resemblance immediately. The same warm brown eyes, the same determined jawline. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm Lena Brooks, Caleb's sister." Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit down. Is everything all right? Is Caleb okay?" Lena studied her for a moment before answering. "He's fine, physically, but he's been different since he stopped working for you." "Different how?" "Quieter, more withdrawn. He won't tell me what happened, but I know it has something to do with you." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Caleb doesn't usually get attached to clients. He keeps things professional, does his job, moves on, but you got under his skin somehow." The words hit Eleanor like a revelation. She hadn't imagined the connection between them. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked. Lena leaned forward in her chair. "Because my brother is one of the good ones, and I think you might be too. But you're both so busy protecting yourselves that you're missing something that could be important." Eleanor's throat felt tight. "It's complicated." "Why? Because you're white and he's black?" The directness of the question startled Eleanor. "No, I mean, that's not—" "It's okay," Lena said gently. "You can say it. Race makes things complicated, but it doesn't make them impossible." Eleanor stared down at her hands. I don't have experience with what? Dating a black man? Dating anyone who works for you? Or just dating someone who sees you as a person instead of a bank account?" All of the above, Eleanor thought, but she couldn't say that out loud. "Caleb quit working for you because he was starting to care about you," Lena continued. "And he was afraid that caring about you would put him in an impossible position." "What kind of position?" "The kind where he'd have to choose between his dignity and his feelings." The words cut deep because Eleanor understood exactly what Lena meant. In Caleb's world, getting involved with a wealthy white client could look like opportunism. In Eleanor's world, it could look like rebellion or slumming. Both perspectives made Eleanor feel sick. "I would never." Eleanor started, then stopped. What could she say? That she would never judge him, that she would never let anyone else judge him. How could she promise something like that when she lived in a world where judgment was currency? "I know you wouldn't mean to," Lena said softly, "but intent and impact aren't always the same thing." They sat in silence for a moment. Eleanor felt like she was seeing herself clearly for the first time in years. Her privilege, her assumptions, her carefully controlled world that kept her safe, but also kept her isolated. "What should I do?" Eleanor asked. Lena smiled for the first time since she'd entered the office. "That's up to you. But if you care about him, really care about him, you'll figure out a way to show him that you see him as an equal, not just a driver." After Lena left, Eleanor sat in her office staring out the window at the busy street below. She thought about all the conversations she'd never had, all the assumptions she'd never questioned, all the ways she'd lived her life in a bubble of privilege and control. She thought about Caleb's quiet dignity, his gentle observations, his refusal to accept her invitation for coffee because he knew it would compromise his professional position. And she thought about what it might mean to step outside her comfort zone and fight for something real. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor Whitmore was considering taking a risk that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with her heart. The question was whether she was brave enough to take it. That evening, Eleanor made a decision. Instead of going home to her empty penthouse, she drove to the address Lena had mentioned, a small cafe in a neighborhood she'd never visited before. Mel's Diner sat on a corner between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The neon sign in the window flickered slightly, and the building looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Eleanor parked across the street and sat in her car for 10 minutes, trying to gather her courage. Through the large front windows, she could see Caleb sitting in a corner booth with his laptop open in front of him. He looked tired, and there was a sadness in his posture that made Eleanor's chest ache. Before she could lose her nerve, Eleanor got out of her car and crossed the street. The diner smelled like coffee and fried food. A few customers sat scattered throughout the worn vinyl booths, mostly older folks and people who looked like they worked night shifts. Eleanor felt overdressed in her tailored suit and heels. Caleb looked up as she approached his table. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "Eleanor," he closed his laptop and half stood. "What are you doing here? I talked to your sister today." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Lena needs to mind her own business. She cares about you. I know she does, but this isn't her fight." Eleanor slid into the booth across from him without being invited. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension around his mouth. "What fight, Caleb?" He looked away, focusing on something outside the window. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me. Why?" His eyes snapped back to hers. "Because you feel guilty? Because you think I'm some kind of charity case?" The pain in his voice made Eleanor's heart crack. "No, because I miss you." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Around them, the diner continued its quiet evening business. Someone ordered pie at the counter. A trucker paid his check and left a generous tip. "Eleanor," Caleb said finally, "you don't know me. You know 2 hours of polite conversation and professional service. That's not the same thing. Then help me know you. Why would you want to?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Eleanor thought about all the easy answers she could give. Because she was lonely. Because he was different. Because he made her feel things she'd forgotten she could feel. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any of that. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like myself," she said quietly, "and I haven't felt like myself in a very long time." Caleb's expression softened, but he didn't respond immediately. Eleanor could see him weighing her words, testing them for sincerity. "What about your world?" he asked. "Your family, your business associates, your social circle? What happens when they meet the black guy you're dating?" The bluntness of the question made Eleanor flinch. Not because it was unfair, but because it was entirely fair. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never had to deal with that before." "And what if you can't handle it? What if the pressure gets to be too much and you decide it's easier to date someone who fits better with your lifestyle?" Eleanor met his eyes directly. "What if you decide I'm just another privileged white woman who doesn't understand anything about your life?" "What if you are? What if I'm not?" They stared at each other across the scratched Formica table. Eleanor could feel her heart pounding, could see the same uncertainty and longing in Caleb's eyes that she felt in her own chest. "This is complicated," Caleb said finally. "Yes, it could get messy. Probably. People are going to have opinions." "Definitely." Caleb almost smiled at that. "You're not exactly selling this." I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to be honest. About what? Eleanor took a deep breath. About the fact that I think about you all the time. About the fact that talking to you feels more real than anything else in my life. About the fact that I'd rather sit in this diner with you than attend another business dinner with people who don't really know me. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. What do you want from me, Eleanor? I want to know what you think about when you're driving at night. I want to know what books you've read and what places you'd like to visit. I want to know what makes you laugh and what makes you angry. And then what? I don't know. Maybe we figure it out as we go. Caleb studied her face like he was memorizing it. That's not much of a plan. No, Eleanor agreed. It's not. But it was honest. And somehow, in the fluorescent light of a rundown diner, honesty felt like enough. Caleb was quiet for so long that Eleanor began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. The sounds of the diner seemed amplified. The hiss of the coffee machine, the scrape of chairs against linoleum, the murmur of conversations at other tables. You want to know what I think about when I drive at night? Caleb said finally. Eleanor nodded. I think about my father. He died when I was 12. Heart attack at work. He was a security guard at an office building downtown. Worked double shifts to keep us fed. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. I'm sorry. He used to tell me that dignity wasn't something you could buy or sell. It was something you carried inside yourself, no matter what job you had or how people treated you. Caleb's fingers traced patterns on the table. Some nights I wonder if he'd be proud of the choices I've made. What choices? Playing it safe, keeping my head down, never taking risks that might cost me everything. Eleanor leaned forward. Is that what I am? A risk that might cost you everything? Caleb met her eyes. You're a risk that might change everything. That's scarier. The waitress appeared beside their table. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes. You folks want some coffee? Pie's fresh. Coffee, Eleanor said. Please. Same, Caleb added. When the waitress left, Caleb continued. I've been thinking about you too, about our conversations, about the way you looked when your mother called that night. How did I look? Like someone had reminded you of all the ways you weren't good enough. The observation hit Eleanor like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. My mother has very specific ideas about success, Eleanor said, about what my life should look like. And what should it look like? Eleanor thought about her mother's vision. Marriage to an appropriate man. Someone with the right background, the right education, the right social connections. Children who would carry on the family name and legacy. A life of charity work and social events. Successful but not too ambitious. Accomplished but not threatening. Smaller, Eleanor said finally. Safer, more controlled. That doesn't sound like you. How would you know? Caleb smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him that evening. Because you invited your driver up for coffee. Because you tracked me down at a diner in a neighborhood you've probably never been to before. Because you're sitting here asking me about my father instead of running back to your safe, controlled world. The waitress returned with their coffee. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to do with her nervous energy. What about you? She asked. What does your family think about this? Lena thinks you might be good for me. She also thinks I'm an idiot for running away. And what do you think? Caleb was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into his coffee. I think I've spent most of my life being careful, making choices that wouldn't make waves or cause problems, and I'm tired of being careful. So what do we do? We could start with dinner. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Dinner? A real date. Somewhere nice. Somewhere we can talk without feeling like we're breaking rules. I'd like that. Saturday night? Yes. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, the tension between them shifting from uncertainty to anticipation. When they finally left the diner, the evening air felt crisp with possibility. "Eleanor," Caleb said as they stood beside her car. "Just so we're clear, I'm not looking for a sugar mama or a ticket to your world. I'm looking for something real." "So am I. And if your mother disapproves? If your business associates think you've lost your mind?" Eleanor thought about her mother's voice on the phone, about the careful judgments and coded language she'd grown up with, about the world she'd inherited and never questioned. "Then they'll have to deal with it," she said. "I'm tired of living my life for other people." Caleb stepped closer, his dark eyes serious. "This might get complicated." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true, and because I need to know you understand what you're signing up for." Eleanor reached out and touched his hand. His skin was warm, calloused from work, real in a way that most things in her life weren't. "I understand that I don't want to spend another week missing you," she said. "I understand that you make me feel braver than I've ever felt before. And I understand that some things are worth the risk." Caleb's fingers intertwined with hers. "Saturday night, then." Saturday night. Eleanor spent Saturday afternoon in a state of nervous excitement she hadn't felt since high school. She changed clothes 4 times before settling on a simple black dress that was elegant but not flashy, professional but warm. Caleb had suggested a restaurant in the arts district, somewhere between their two worlds, he'd said. Neither too fancy nor too casual. Eleanor looked up the menu online and was surprised to find herself looking forward to trying something new. When she arrived at the restaurant, Caleb was already waiting outside. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and Eleanor felt her breath catch at how handsome he looked. "You clean up nice," she said as he opened the door for her. "So do you." The restaurant was exactly what Eleanor needed, intimate but not stuffy, with exposed brick walls and soft jazz playing in the background. Their table was tucked into a quiet corner where they could talk without being overheard. "This is perfect," Eleanor said as they settled into their seats. "I hoped you'd like it. The owner's a friend of mine from college." "You went to college?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Did you think I didn't?" Eleanor felt her cheeks burn. I never asked. Business degree from state. I had plans to work in corporate finance, but life had other ideas." "What happened?" "My father died right before graduation. Lena was still in high school, and my mother was struggling to keep up with the bills. I took the first job I could find that paid well enough to help out." "That must have been difficult." "It was what needed to be done." Caleb's voice was matter of fact, without self-pity. "Family comes first." Eleanor thought about her own family obligations, the social events, the charity boards, the careful maintenance of her mother's expectations. None of it felt as necessary or meaningful as what Caleb had done. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Not the choice to help my family. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been able to follow the original plan." Their conversation flowed easily through dinner. Caleb told her about the books he read, mostly literary fiction and biographies. He talked about his dream of visiting New Zealand, about his sister's success in nursing school, about the neighborhood where he'd grown up. Eleanor found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her fear that she was becoming like her mother. Her loneliness in a world full of acquaintances but few real friends. Her suspicion that she'd built her entire life around other people's expectations. "What would you do?" Caleb asked over dessert, "if you could start over completely?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I think I'd want to build something that mattered. Not just profitable, but meaningful. Maybe work with organizations that help people start over themselves." "What's stopping you?" "Fear, mostly. And momentum. When your whole life is set up one way, it's hard to imagine changing direction. But not impossible." "No, not impossible. After dinner, they walked through the arts district. The evening was cool, and Eleanor found herself walking closer to Caleb than she normally would with someone she'd just started dating. It felt natural, comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said as they paused outside a small gallery. "Of course. That first night, when I invited you up for coffee, why did you say no?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Because I liked you. And because I've learned that mixing business with personal feelings usually ends badly for the person with less power. You thought I had power over you? You did have power over me. You could have gotten me fired with one phone call." Eleanor stopped walking. "I would never have done that. I know that now. But at the time, all I knew was that you were a wealthy white woman, and I was a black man who needed the job. Those dynamics have a history." The weight of his words settled over Eleanor. She thought about all the ways their interaction had been shaped by forces bigger than both of them, all the assumptions and power imbalances she'd been blind to. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not understanding, for not even thinking about it. You don't need to apologize for not knowing something you've never had to experience. But you do need to be willing to learn. I am willing." Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we try to build something together, there are going to be people who have opinions about it. Some of those people will be polite about it. Others won't be. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to make sure you know what you're getting into." Eleanor thought about her mother's probable reaction, about the whispered conversations at charity galas, about business associates who might question her judgment. What if I told you I don't care what they think? I'd say you think you don't care now, but you've never had to deal with it before. Then I guess we'll find out together. Caleb studied her face in the soft light from the gallery window. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor thought about the last 2 weeks without him, about the emptiness she'd felt, the sense that she was going through the motions of her life without really living it. "I'm sure I want to try." Caleb reached up and touched her face gently. "So do I." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure at the same time. Soft, tentative at first, then deeper as Eleanor melted into his arms. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor was breathless. "That was worth the wait," she whispered. Caleb smiled. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" "Yeah, we really are." The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and careful planning. Caleb picked Eleanor up for their second date in his own car instead of a company sedan. They went to a jazz club where the music was loud enough to drown out conversation and intimate enough for Eleanor to rest her hand on Caleb's knee while they listened. Their third date was a picnic in the park. Caleb brought homemade sandwiches, and Eleanor contributed wine that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. They talked about everything and nothing, lying on a blanket under the autumn sky. By their fourth date, Eleanor was sure she was falling in love. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt like relief. For the first time in her adult life, she was making a choice based purely on what she wanted, not what was expected or appropriate. But she knew the bubble they'd created couldn't last forever. The test came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Eleanor was having dinner with Caleb at a small Italian restaurant when she spotted a familiar face across the room. Patricia Reynolds, her mother's closest friend and the biggest gossip in their social circle. Eleanor's blood turned cold as Patricia's eyes widened in recognition. She watched Patricia's gaze move from Eleanor's face to Caleb's, taking in their intimate table positioning, their clasped hands, the obvious romantic nature of their dinner. "Eleanor," Caleb said quietly, "you look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I've seen my mother's best friend." Caleb followed her gaze and spotted Patricia, who was now whispering urgently to her dining companion. "Want to leave?" Caleb asked. Eleanor looked at him. This man who'd become so important to her in such a short time, who made her laugh and challenged her thinking and held her when she needed comfort, who deserved better than to be someone's dirty secret. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Let's finish our dinner." She kept her hand in Caleb's and met Patricia's shocked stare with a calm smile. Whatever storm was coming, she would face it head-on, because some things were worth fighting for. And Caleb Brooks was definitely one of them. The call from her mother came the next morning at 7 a.m. "Eleanor Catherine Whitmore." Margaret's voice was ice-cold. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Eleanor had been expecting this call since she'd spotted Patricia at the restaurant. She'd prepared herself for her mother's reaction, but hearing the actual anger in Margaret's voice still made her stomach clench. "Good morning, Mother." "Don't you good morning me. Patricia called me last night absolutely beside herself. She said you were having dinner with some man at a public restaurant, acting like what, Mother? Like you were on a date." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I was on a date." The silence that followed was deafening. "Eleanor," Margaret said finally, her voice dangerously quiet, "please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding. I'm seeing someone." "This is not funny. I'm not trying to be funny." Another silence. Eleanor could picture her mother in her pristine kitchen, gripping the phone with white knuckles. "Who is he?" "His name is Caleb Brooks. He's kind, intelligent, and he makes me happy." "What does he do?" Eleanor hesitated. She could lie, embellish, make Caleb sound more acceptable to her mother's standards. But she was tired of lying about who she was and what she wanted. "He drives for a living." The sound Margaret made was somewhere between a gasp and a growl. "Eleanor, have you lost your mind? A driver? What will people think?" "I don't care what people think." "Well, you should care. You have a reputation to maintain, a business to run. You can't go around making a spectacle of yourself with inappropriate men." The word inappropriate hung in the air like a poison cloud. Eleanor felt anger rise in her chest, hot and righteous. "What makes him inappropriate, Mother?" "Don't be obtuse. You know exactly what I mean." "Say it out loud." "Eleanor, say what you really mean. Don't hide behind euphemisms." Margaret's voice was shaking when she spoke. "Fine. He's black, Eleanor, and he's poor, and he's completely wrong for you." There it was, the ugly truth that had been lurking beneath all of Margaret's careful language and coded concerns. "No," Eleanor said quietly. "He's not wrong for me. He's the first person who's been right for me in years. This is a phase. You're rebelling against your upbringing, acting out. I understand, but you need to end this before it goes any further." "I'm 32 years old, Mother. I'm not acting out. I'm making choices. Bad choices. My choices." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and formal. "If you continue this relationship, you'll be doing so without my support, financial or otherwise." The threat was clear. Margaret controlled Eleanor's trust fund, her place in the family business, her social connections. She was offering Eleanor a choice, Caleb or everything else. "I understand," Eleanor said. "Eleanor, please, don't throw your life away for some infatuation." "I'm not throwing my life away, Mother. I'm finally living it." Eleanor hung up before Margaret could respond. She sat in her office chair, staring at her phone, feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff. Her mother's anger wasn't surprising, but the financial threat was real. Eleanor had her own money from her business, but losing her trust fund would mean losing the safety net she'd always taken for granted. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Good morning, beautiful. Thinking about you." The simple message made Eleanor smile despite everything. Whatever she'd lost by standing up to her mother, she'd gained something infinitely more valuable. She'd gained herself. Eleanor texted back, "Good morning. Can we talk tonight? I have something to tell you. Everything okay?" "Better than okay. I'll explain later." That evening, Eleanor met Caleb at his apartment for the first time. It was small but comfortable, filled with books and plants and photographs of his family. It felt more like home than her penthouse ever had. "So," Caleb said as they settled onto his couch with takeout Chinese food, "what did you want to tell me?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "My mother knows about us. She's not happy." Caleb's expression grew serious. "How not happy?" "She threatened to cut me off financially if I don't end things with you." "Eleanor," "I told her no." Caleb stared at her. "What do you mean you told her no?" "I mean I chose you. I chose us. Do you understand what you just gave up?" Eleanor set down her chopsticks and turned to face him fully. "I gave up money that came with strings attached. I gave up approval that was conditional on me living someone else's life. I gave up a relationship with someone who would rather control me than love me. That's a lot to give up for someone you've known for a few weeks. It's not about time, Caleb. It's about feeling like myself for the first time in years. It's about choosing love over fear." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor could see him processing her words, weighing their implications. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "I'm sure I'd rather build something real with you than maintain something fake without you." Caleb reached for her hands. "This changes things between us. You know that, right?" "How?" "Because now we're in this together, really in this. No going back to our separate worlds if things get difficult." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "Good. I didn't want separate worlds anyway." When Caleb kissed her that night, it felt like a promise, a commitment to whatever came next, however complicated it might be. Later, as they lay together in his bed, Eleanor felt a peace she'd never experienced before. She thought about her mother, probably sitting in her pristine house, furious and disappointed. She thought about the social circle that would gossip about her choices. She thought about the business associates who would question her judgment, and she realized she didn't care about any of it. What mattered was the man sleeping beside her. What mattered was the life they could build together, based on honesty and mutual respect and love that didn't require her to be smaller or different or more acceptable. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Whitmore was exactly where she belonged. 3 months later, Eleanor and Caleb moved in together. Not to her penthouse or his small apartment, but to a new place they chose together, a converted loft in an up-and-coming neighborhood that felt like neutral territory. Eleanor had started her own consulting firm, specializing in helping small businesses grow sustainably. It paid less than her corporate job had, but it felt meaningful in a way that reviewing contracts and managing investments never had. Caleb had enrolled in night school to finish his business degree. He still drove part-time to pay the bills, but now it felt like a temporary step rather than a permanent resignation. They were building something together, something real, something lasting, something that belonged entirely to them. Eleanor's mother still wasn't speaking to her, but Eleanor had hope that would change eventually. Love and stubbornness often looked similar, and Margaret Whitmore was capable of both. In the meantime, Eleanor had found family in unexpected places. Lena had become like a sister to her, teaching her to cook soul food and sharing stories about Caleb's childhood that made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. Mrs. Alvarez, the night security supervisor from Eleanor's old building, had become an unlikely friend and mentor. She'd seen Eleanor and Caleb together during their early evening drives and had been quietly rooting for them from the beginning. "Love doesn't ask permission," Mrs. Alvarez had told Eleanor one afternoon over coffee. "It just shows up and changes everything. The only choice you have is whether to let it." Eleanor had chosen to let it. And in letting love change everything, she discovered that everything had needed changing anyway. On a cold December evening, exactly 1 year after their first drive together, Caleb and Eleanor sat in their car outside the diner where they'd had their first real conversation. "Remember when you asked me what I thought about during night drives?" Caleb said. "I remember." "You want to know what I think about now?" Eleanor smiled. "Tell me." "I think about how lucky I am, how easily we could have missed each other, how many things had to go right for us to end up here. Marcus quitting, Daniel finding your application, you being desperate enough to take a job driving some uptight CEO around town, you being brave enough to sit across from me in a greasy diner and ask for something real." Eleanor leaned across the console to kiss him. "We're pretty good at this, aren't we?" "At what?" "At choosing each other, even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated." They sat in comfortable silence, watching people come and go from the diner. Young couples on dates, families grabbing quick dinners, solitary figures seeking warmth and coffee on a cold night. "Caleb," Eleanor said, "I have something to tell you." "Should I be worried?" Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "I hope not." Caleb's eyes widened. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" "I'm asking you to marry me." "That's not how this usually works." Eleanor laughed. "When have we ever done anything the usual way?" Caleb took the box with shaking hands and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. No diamonds, no flashy stones, just solid, enduring, real. "Eleanor, I know it's unconventional. I know some people will think I'm crazy, but I love you, Caleb Brooks. I love your kindness and your strength and your integrity. I love how you see me and how you challenge me. I love the life we're building together." Tears were streaming down Caleb's face. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." "Then yes." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." Eleanor slipped the ring onto his finger, and Caleb pulled her across the console into his arms. They kissed, surrounded by the soft glow of the diner's neon sign. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen love over fear. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb was grinning through his tears. "So what happens now?" he asked. Eleanor looked out at the city where they'd met, where they'd fallen in love, where they'd learned to choose each other over and over again. "Now we keep going," she said, "together." And in the quiet warmth of their shared car, with the promise of tomorrow shining ahead of them, that felt like the most beautiful word in the world. Together. The end.